Welcome to Boykin'S Tavern here in Isle of Wight County, Virginia. Tavern sits on 400 acres, originally patented in 1661 by William Body. It's believed that a small residence was at this location when purchased by William Ponsonby for about 40 pounds in 1733. The original part of the tavern was built by Ponsonby around 1762, along with an outdoor kitchen, a smokehouse, storehouse, apple and peach orchard, and a grist mill. Robert Marshall purchased the plantation in 1779 and then resold it to his brother-in-law, Major Francis Boykin. As an Isle of Wight native, Major Boykin grew up on a nearby plantation, Foursquare, during the Revolutionary War. He was a patriot and an officer commissioned a first lieutenant in Patrick Henry's regiment in January of 1776. After the war, he became a leader in the county and was instrumental in moving the county seat from Smithfield to this location. Boykin was a delegate to the General Assembly in Richmond, and at the request of his constituents to move the courthouse to a more central location within the county, he offered to donate 2 acres of land on which he himself proposed to build and bear the expense for the new courthouse. Construction began in 1799 and was completed in 1801. Conveniently, the tavern here was located next door for needed meals and refreshments for court officers and travelers. So the tavern served as a place to hold court while the new courthouse was under construction. As Major Boykin increased the size of the tavern, a ladies' parlor was added for traveling ladies. As was the custom, genteel ladies did not want to associate with the manners and the language of the average male tavern goer. Women could rest comfortably and enjoy tea and meals in that separate space. So the increased size and use of the tavern during court days prompted several entrances to the building. Travelers could arrive at any time in need of refreshments and lodging. The Boykin family occupied a few rooms, while other rooms were designated as male or female with more than one person per bed. Most taverns did not boast separate rooms for their guests, so the guests would rent space for the night and hope that their roommates didn't snore or have any bugs. In 1805, Boykin died and left the tavern and plantation, the sawmill, the grist mill, 28 slaves, Scott's factory textile mill to his son, Colonel Francis Marshall Boykin. Of special note, Boykin's will listed an inventory of the tavern and farm which denoted a successful plantation. So included in that list were 14.5 gallons of French brandy, a pint of olives, tobacco, 22 pounds of drinking chocolate, coffee, sugar, 3,000 pounds of bacon, and down in cotton coverlets for the tavern beds. Boykin's son, Francis Marshall Boykin, joined the Virginia militia during the War of 1812. He increased the size of the tavern by adding a second story. Colonel Boykin received a contract from Isle of Wight County to make improvements on the courthouse that his father built. He was to add a second floor and to shore up the brick of the building. Upon his death in 1817, his wife Fanny Godwin Boykin inherited the tavern and plantation. She sold the property in 1831 to Willis Woodley for $5,000 and moved into the town of Smithfield. This is the main tavern room. A traditional country tavern in the early United States was sparsely furnished, had straw on the floor, and that was for dirty boots, and it offered local spirits and fare. Local food would have been produced here on the Boykin plantation and other farms in the area that served the tavern. Depending on the time of year, meals could feature James River oysters, ham from the smokehouse, vegetables from the garden, or breads and cakes from the flour ground at the nearby grist mill. Spirits were distilled from the peaches and the apples in the orchard. On court day, between 1799 and 1801, this tavern was home to court proceedings and the excitement of court day. Usually held one day a month, court days were a time for Isle of Wight County residents to do business, purchase wares, and catch up on the local gossip. Once the courthouse was constructed, the tavern continued to host judges and citizens alike. Picnics were held on the lawn next to the tavern, and stalls were set up for vendors. With its proximity to the main road, locals and travelers could stop for refreshments, have their grain ground at the mill, or pick up supplies for home. Successive owners of the tavern continued to offer lodging and meals on court days up until the 20th century. This is the warming kitchen. Food production was a major task in rural Virginia. Each day, bread was baked, cows were milked, chickens were fed, and spirits were distilled. The tavern had a separate kitchen behind the building. It's no longer standing, but the entrance to a warming kitchen is still visible. The warming kitchen provided a location to keep warm and plate food. The steps lead directly up to the main tavern room. With a tavern, farm, mercantile business, grist mill, and sawmill, as well as an apple and a peach orchard, the Boykins had both servants and slaves. Currently, we have limited information about the number of servants or slaves at the tavern, but upon his death, Major Boykin had 28 slaves, both adults and children. There's a 1776 Virginia Gazette advertisement for Francis Boykin asking for the information about a runaway male slave. The warming kitchen fell into disuse from 1861 when William Womble purchased the house, and the kitchen became a storage area until renovations began in 1999. This is the gaming room. Taverns were establishments that fostered activity from morning until night. While county residents met here to socialize, trade gossip, and transact business on court day, typical days at a tavern could also feature meals, games, dancing, feats of strength, outdoor sports, political and philosophical discussions, or fights between the inebriated. Gaming in taverns was a controversial issue, especially when gambling became associated with various activities. However, card playing was a very prominent amusement. The stairwell here was added during Colonel BOYKIN'S renovations, as well as the addition of a second story between 1805 and 1817. The steep stairwell was the only access to the second floor. In the floorboards of the tavern, an 1813 document was discovered during the restoration. Colonel BOYKIN was responsible for collecting tithes from the members of Newport Parish. Listed on that document are names of the gentlemen and how much they owed to maintain the church in Isle of Wight. This is the tavern keeper's room. After Colonel BOYKIN'S death in 1817, his widow Fanny Godwin BOYKIN continued to run the tavern. It is believed that she hired a gentleman to manage it. His duties would have included seeing to the guests, food procurement, maintenance, and security. Tavern keeper would have had his own room, possibly near a door for safety, as well as late-night arrivals. This is the Victorian room. In 1831, Willis Woodley purchased the tavern and plantation from Fanny Godwin BOYKIN for $5,000. The Woodleys then sold the property to John Latimer in 1839. These families did not alter the building, and at the beginning of the Civil War, when the Virginia courts were suspended, the courthouse records were moved to a safer location. Tavern went through a series of owners. In 1861, William Womble purchased the property for $5,150. He was an attorney and became a magistrate of Isle of Wight County in addition to sitting on the Board of Supervisors. He continued to run a small tavern and rented out rooms, and during the economic depression that followed the Civil War, Womble was forced to sell 103 acres of the plantation. Ring tournaments were held in Isle of Wight County just after the Civil War. Tournaments had series of rings hanging on a string, and riders on horseback carried a joisting stick, and they could catch as many of those rings as possible. These gentlemen referred to themselves as knights, and after the contest, balls were held. In 1866, a ball was held here and included Isle of Wight, Nansemond, Southampton, and Surrey Knights. It lasted 2 days, and there was a ball each evening. When the Battens purchased the 297-acre farm and tavern from the Womble estate in 1902 for $4,850, he increased and modernized the house, adding a third story, front porches, this main staircase, electricity, and plumbing. He also built a store in the front yard near the road, which was still a main thoroughfare from Smithfield to Franklin. The Battens provided lodging for judges, lawyers, and citizens during court days, and they also provided food on those days and meals to any prisoners in the jail. In 1913, Fred and Cora Wilson purchased the home, the 250-acre farm and store from Batten for $8,000. Fred Wilson farmed and was the jailer for the Isle of Wight County Jail. A relative ran the store while Cora boarded school teachers for the new school across the street. After the death of Cora, the house and 2 acres were sold to Isle of Wight County in 1973. In 1997, a group of local citizens assembled to take on the restoration of the house and develop it as an historic site. BOYKIN'S Tavern was placed on the National Register of Historic Places in 1974, but the building had decayed over time. Money was raised and the work was completed in 2002. BOYKIN'S Tavern was furnished with a variety of period and reproduction furnishings. Currently, the second floor of the building is occupied by the Isle of Wight County Department of Economic Development, and the main floor is open to the public. In 2019, the entire Isle of Wight County Courthouse District was placed on the National Register of Historic Places.